Okay, I see live on Facebook in the upper left-hand corner. Does that mean we're live?
Yeah.
Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our stream today. This is the Betsy Freeman Show. I'm Emerson Gregori. With me today is Beau McCoy, Meggan Taylor, and Deborah Littleton. And today we're going to be discussing theater and playwrights. Just a little bit first about myself. I am a student of theater. I have a degree in theater, and I've been in a lot of plays. I'm an actor, and also I'm a writer. Deborah, if you would introduce yourself.
Taking it away, I'm Deborah Littleton. I'm a theater artist with a degree also. I am also a freelance writer, director, actor, costumer, all of the above. If you give the checklist, I do a little bit of writing also. I am also a freelance writer, director. I don't know where that came from. I'm echoing back at myself. And I also do something called Toastmasters, which helps speaking skills and leadership skills. That's me in a nutshell. And sometimes I am a nut.
Thank you, Deborah. Meggan, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Hi, I'm Meggan Taylor, and I've studied theater and been involved in performing most of my life. I started dancing, performing when I was very small, and I stopped for a long time, but I got back into it several years ago, and I've done some commercials and some movies. I've also done a little directing, and theater's my first love, and I'm excited to talk about it today.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Beau McCoy, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Beau McCoy. I am a 34-year-old playwright. I've written, as of right now, 20 full-length plays. I am also a middle school math and history teacher.
Thank you so much. So let's get right into those questions. Our first question is, which playwright do you identify with most and why? And I think let's start with Beau.
All right. So when I got the question for this, there were a few playwrights that came to mind. I'm only going to list maybe one or two, possibly three, depending. The first one that came to mind was one playwright called Annie Baker. She's been writing plays now for, I think her first one that she was well known for was Body Awareness in 2008, 2007. She's written a few other ones, one called Circle Mirror Transformation. The one that I really responded to was one called The Aliens, which I read back when I was 25. It deals with three different characters, two of which are these sort of stoner kids who are early 30s, hanging out in this coffee shop or outside of this coffee shop, and then they befriend this one 17-year-old barista. And I read it at a time where I was sort of in the middle between all of these characters. I wasn't, to my early 30s yet, but I was no longer a teenager at this sort of flux position. And the play hit me at a time where I kind of needed it, and it helped me to redirect my energies towards writing, and started writing maybe about 2 weeks after that. And I've been writing ever since, going on almost 10 years now. What I appreciate about Annie Baker specifically is that she has a really interesting relationship with the ephemeral. There are a lot of interesting elements to her plays where she leaves a lot of opportunity and area for silences, knowing that people in general, myself included, learn and process more when we are engaging with silence, either our own silence or the silence surrounding us based on our landscape. And I think what I've really enjoyed by not only reading but watching her plays when I've had the opportunity to is that she really latches onto those feelings and those moments which sort of come out of nowhere, and they exist and then they pass by us. And the fact that she's able to write it so eloquently and so perfectly in her plays, but then also that they translate so well to the stage means a lot to me. And it's been something that's really been wonderful. And I love Sarah Ruhl's writing just because she plays with magic and her sense of lightness, but I'll talk about that probably a little bit later.
Great, Beau, thanks. Meggan, Which playwright do you most identify with and why?
That's so funny, and I feel sort of old-fashioned, I guess is the word. I guess the playwright that I most enjoy consistently is Neil Simon. He just surprises me. He's so very funny. We accept that he's funny, but then he writes about these very normal human challenges. Plaza Suite, which was staged in 1968, talks so very directly about the problems facing women. If your husband left you, you basically had no access to money, credit cards. You were completely dependent on your husband. You couldn't get a credit card or rent an apartment. And I did the production through my high school alumni association with a bunch of other alumni from my high school. Excuse me, I have to cough. And instead of being a white Jewish man cast in the role of the lead, it was one of my classmates who actually is from Louisiana, is African American. And I was worried that, Neil Simon's, his cadence would be awkward for Lynn. And yet, when he was reading these lines, it was so perfect. It translated perfectly. So it's amazing to me that that speaks to me most. But I do love Edward Albee, and there's other playwrights, but I guess Neil Simon's the one that sticks mostly in my head.
Great, Megan. Deborah, same question. Which playwright do you identify with most and why?
The funny thing is that I didn't know that I identified with him because of the real reason. It's Arthur Miller. When he wrote Death of a Salesman, Willy Loman, he was the perfect everyman, problematic salesman who wasn't successful, always down on his luck, but talking a good game. And after a while, I realized my dad was Willy Loman, cheating on his wife out on the road. My dad wasn't out on the road, but that's the reason we don't live in Michigan today. We moved out when I was 4, and when I saw that play, I'm not sure if I saw it in college, but I did a scene from it in an acting class, and just the devastation that the whole family went through because this man, we all have consequences for our actions, and because he was never honest with his wife, the whole family structure was problematic. One child emulated the father and ended up being always running away from his problems. The other one tried to make a go of it in business, but so the whole thing was about the human existence, where you try for that family, the American dream, and just never getting there. In the very end, he commits suicide for a life insurance policy that, because it was suicide, they deemed it not worthy of the life insurance. So he killed himself for nothing in the end. My dad didn't quite follow that kind of stuff, but he was a real estate agent, always talking it up. And the whole family would tune him out so that my half brother said his party pose was falling asleep in a corner in a chair because nobody wanted to listen to him anymore. He always talked that game, much like Willy Loman. And so I relate to him on that respect. And also for the Crucible, he took a very real hot button issue in the day, which was McCarthyism. People were being turned in, they were being asked to give names of sympathizers. They started finally rebelling and saying, I'm not giving a name. And that whole scenario was completely adapted to the witch hunt and trials in Salem. And I got to actually play a part in it when I was in my acting courses studying the Meisner method. I played the 10-year-old, and I went, I don't look like a 10-year-old. I think I was 35, whatever it was. But in playing those scenes where we were supposed to be in the trial and hysterically reacting to the angels or the witches that were in the corner of the room, I was really just taken by it. And the director would always look at me after we would do the rehearsal and go, "You've got it." And just the power that you have in theater, being able to say a message. I don't know that I agree with them saying their message on the stage when they're getting their awards, but when you're saying it in that film and when you're saying it in all the articles that are written, you've got a really powerful tool to be able to say something about humanity in that. And I like that about theater. Thank you so much, Emerson.
Thanks, Deborah. So as for me, my answer to this question is somewhat cheesy. My first exposure to theater in general was in class when we read Shakespeare. And one of the things that we did that year was we started writing sonnets. And prior to that, I hadn't been very good at any kind of writing or anything like that. But through writing my own sonnets and reading Shakespeare's sonnets, I just fell in love with words for the first time. And then I started reading Shakespeare's plays, and that just doubled down the whole thing. And so I very much doubt that I would be in theater today if it wasn't for Shakespeare. I love him, and I know Shakespeare, being the one that I identify with most, is like kind of like, hey, come on, don't be so cocky, kid. But I don't think I write as well as him. I just look up to him a lot, and I feel like he does an amazing job at showing things from so many different perspectives and talking about really dark things in ways that actually make it palatable. One of my favorite scenes in a play is right after a really dark moment in Hamlet. Two clowns come up and they start talking about whether or not Ophelia can have a Catholic burial or Christian burial because it's, suicide. But they're like, well, the water killed her. And I know that as I'm describing this right now, this sounds horrible and not funny at all. But the way Shakespeare writes that, it's just such a necessary antidote to a really tense and dark moment. And I was cracking up the first time I read that play. And so, I mean, that's why I love him, is because he can take a situation that's hard, show you every side of it, and then lead you through with hope. Our next question is, what was your most impactful theatrical experience? And this time, I think I'd like to start with Meggan.
Well, recently, I have to say that the most impactful was Come From Away, which is a musical about 9/11. And the people who ended up getting sent to Newfoundland because they couldn't land the planes anywhere else. It contained a lot of interesting facts, like I didn't realize that Newfoundland had the largest airstrip because it had been so that they could refuel planes during World War II, and they needed a really long airstrip so they could handle the 747s, which a lot of other local airports couldn't handle. So there was all of these interesting facts, but the staging of it was brilliant. They didn't use, the people in it were very approachable. There was one older woman, a couple of older women, and both of them were on the plus size, which was nice to see. The music is amazing and brilliantly interwoven into the story. It showed sorrow and joy and love and redemption. It was at the end of it, everyone leapt to their feet. Literally, it was just sonorous applause. It was amazing. The other one I have to remember, I was in college and I went to see a college production of A Streetcar Named Desire. And I'm not Again, I'm not a big fan of Marlon Brando. I know everybody's gonna like groan, but I don't actually like him as an actor. And I think Vivian Leigh was very miscast as Blanche Dubois. Scarlett O'Hara would never have ended up like Blanche Dubois. But anyway, so I never was crazy about the film, and I'd never seen it on stage. So I was so amazed at these college, my peers, they were in their early 20s, that managed to do this production of this and left me just bereft at the end of it. I mean, I was so overcome by the end of it. I was like, I think I might want to die. But that's not a good thing, but it is impactful. It made me want to create, and it made me want to be able to act better.
Thanks, Megan. Let's go do Beau next. Beau, what was your most impactful theatrical experience?
So I was trying to think of the shows that I've seen here in California, but then also when I was lucky enough to go to New York a handful of times. And I actually can't choose anything professionally. Actually, I know earlier we had discussed the power of community theater. And I thought back to our community in college where Emerson and I used to go, and the showcases that we used to put on at 11 o'clock at night on Thursday evenings and at noon on Fridays. And actually those, I think, are still, for me, the most impactful theatrical experiences. They weren't by any means professional, but what I appreciated about them is there was always this kind of celebratory feeling to them, and there was a real willingness to try things, risk failure. And I appreciated that. And I appreciated everyone showing up each day and putting their best foot forward and doing things that they knew they may fail at, but you still were able to appreciate it in a way that, even though I've been able to see so many different shows that I've loved, there's always a polish to them, which is wonderful, but I will always be grateful. And I've always felt that the most impactful experiences I've had were those ones that didn't need polish. I think that actually kind of the raw power of what you found in those shows that we had in college were the ones that still move me and impact me most to this day.
Thanks, Beau. Deborah, what was your most impactful theatrical experience?
I have to say, it's not a really well-known musical, but Quilters, which was written by Barbara Damashek and Molly Newman. I had done it as basically the second actual play where I had lines as an adult. And it's all about the women on the plains. It's an all women cast. And the whole thing is written as if it were a quilt, the pieces that were assembled in the quilt. Each scene is a block that's been made, and they'll say Rocky Road. It's the women traveling with quilting hoops or embroidery hoops, but they're actually for quilting. And we look like we're going across the plains in a covered wagon singing a song. All the music was so uplifting and haunting depending on the piece. The whole thing was just memorable. The songs, people in the cast would ask, what's your favorite song? Well, I love this one. I love them all. I could never settle on one song. But for me as an actor, when a woman left and she was making small talk with the actors walking out, she turned to me and she said, you were the most believable one. And I went, that compliment, that was in 1989, and it has stuck with me all this time, because there were a lot of other really experienced women in the show, and I went, oh my goodness. But I remember one particular scene because it was so hard out in the prairies and dealing with Native Americans and everything that these women dealt with in their lives. And a woman who was walking along with her dead child in her arm, still caring for that child. And that scene, still, I remember what I felt like doing it, and it always affects me, and I don't have a problem crying on stage. So people will ask, well, how did you cry during that? Even during Steel Magnolias, when I played the Sally Field part, and I get to boohoo all through the thing, so that if we were doing 2 performances on a Saturday, I had to take a nap because my eyes stung so much. And the ladies would leave going, you should have left us Kleenex boxes. But again, quilters impacted me so much because of the stories, the strength of the stories, what these women had to deal with in living in an impermanent place as they were moving toward the West. It was so impactful because it just, again, those stories were harsh. What they dealt with was harsh. The other one that impacted me as an audience member, I had to just look up the title because I'm not completely familiar with Sam Shepard's plays, but his Fool for Love was about an abusive relationship in a hotel room. And I was sitting, I would say, probably 2 seats from the actors in a actual artsy cinema. They put a very small stage up covering a couple rows of seats, and it was in a theater. So I was about 2 rows away, and it affected me so much viscerally that I felt like I was in the room with them. And that's the power of theater that really gets me. My husband took a friend to see a show once that I was in. He'd never seen live theater, and he went, wow, that was great. He's a truck driver, big equipment operator. So it was really interesting to see his reaction to seeing a show. But again, the power that you get from seeing it live, it's like being in the room with the 4th wall removed. You're right there and seeing it, where when you're watching a movie, yeah, I will react to a movie to the point where my husband, during Saving Private Ryan, he turned to me and he said, are you okay? Because I'm just I'm crying all over the place. But when it's impactful and it just reaches either through the screen and grabs you, or you're sitting in that same little area with 2 people going through a physical relationship that is not healthy, you are impacted by that kind of story.
Thanks, Deborah. You know, Beau mentioned that we went to college together, and we had this thing called this theater thing, where every week we got a play. This was a student production, student directors, sometimes student written. And just that experience, to echo what Beau said, was incredible, because these plays were made by our peers. And sometimes we could walk into the green room, which was just a room in our college, and we would see someone writing a play or working on a play. And then 2, 3, 4 weeks later, we would see that play and it would manifest. And it was amazing watching people reach into the jar of chaos and pull out that chaos and form it into order right in front of us. There was one specific play called Puppet Show that it was a student written play that it was amazing. Student written, student directed. This young woman, I don't remember who she was. I can't remember her name. Beau, maybe you remember. But I think her name was Sam. But she basically made this play, and it was about different puppets and just the way that we live our lives, and our relationship to our own sense of control. And it was through the music of a band called The Knife. And it was just such an amazing visceral experience that it was just so singular and unique, and just experiencing those perspectives in that specific flavor was like nothing I'd ever experienced before, you know? And so for me, that was really impactful, despite the fact that it was just a 40-minute play done by students, written by a student, an undergraduate student. It was just such an incredible production. Our next question is, what kind of plays or which playwrights do you think deserve to get more attention? And Deborah, if you wouldn't mind answering this question first. Oh shoot, you just muted yourself.
I'm still on mute. I had to change to the audio, or the phone is audio. I think, again, that social plays, when you are fighting for a cause, whether or not you agree with it as your ideal or not. I was just watching a piece that one of my students, one of my acting students had done recently on abortion, how women were dealing with abortion in the 50s. And not that I agree with what the play entailed, but what women went through, the feelings that they went through, and just the struggles that they went through. That is important to have that as a mouthpiece. As a playwright, you want to be able to say something important. Neil Simon, I loved his pieces, but it was fluff for the most part. Yeah, he talked about the important thing of families going through separation and divorce and all that, but when you have something that is really important, like what Arthur Miller did with the Crucible, fitting exactly what we're going through as a society, and when John Proctor said, I want my name, let me keep my name. I forgot exactly what it was, but he would not give anybody up, and he went to be hung because he was standing for that principle. So when you have theater as a social narrative or a social commentary, whatever you want to call it, again, even if you don't agree with what it is, people need that voice. They need the freedom of speech to be able to voice it. And so I think that in that way, I think those playwrights need to be helped along, given space to write, given grants and everything, that because you can't just write and not get paid. I know people might write into the wee hours of the morning, but they're doing that on a lack of sleep and all that, to that detriment. So to be able to give those writers grants to be able to incubate those plays, that's important. And I don't have any specific names in mind, but it's important to be able to get those kinds of plays up there and published and acted in, produced.
Thanks, Deborah. Meggan, if you wouldn't mind, the same question. What kind of plays or which playwrights do you think deserve to get more attention?
That's such an important question, and Deborah's right. I mean, yes, we need more productions with social conscience, and I think that theater has done that a lot. Even as something as fluffy as The Prom dealt with, this young girl not being allowed to go to her own prom. And I think theater is able to do that more than film in some ways, except for maybe the documentary issues. But I think that it would be nicer to see more women playwrights and more playwrights of color get more opportunities. I just think that they're just not very well represented. And whether it's people of color, but women in general just don't seem to be making the inroads into playwriting. And I know that you mentioned Annie Baker, who I've never heard of. I'm going to go look her up. But it would be nice. Although I don't like to say that, because I think that, like Arthur Miller, a white guy, he was a good writer. His work is worth producing. Tennessee Williams also, and Shakespeare. So it's hard to say. I want to see good writing supported. We tend to get lazy with entertainment, where we just want to be entertained, and I think it's easy to be lazy with that. And I think it's good that we get some more gritty. As an example, Rodgers and Hammerstein, I mean, they wrote these very traditional musicals. I actually only like a few of their work. But it's amazing when you actually delve into the scripts, like South Pacific, where it's talking about the problem with integration or interracial marriage and how difficult that is. And you think of how risky that was for them to do in the late 40s, early 50s. So I think we just need to support playwrights who are willing to take those risks.
Thanks, Meggan. Beau, what kind of plays or which playwrights do you think deserve to get more attention?
I think actually Meggan sort of touched on what I was going to answer with, which for me, I feel that there are a lot of plays, especially now, that are trying to tackle issues that ordinarily wouldn't have found a place or a position on the stage, particularly as it relates to, I mean, 2020, we had so many different events occur outside of the pandemic, but then that there are playwrights who are people of color. We have, Jeremy O. Harris before the pandemic, who did Slave Play. We have Larissa Fasthorse, who's an Indigenous writer, Native American writer, who wrote the Thanksgiving play. We have, Youngjing Lee. We have Kai Nguyen. So we have all these different writers of color who are finding a different space on stage. But what I also appreciate with them, and what I'm also finding myself more attracted to the older I get and the more that I watch theater, are plays that embrace lightness. And I think that there's this idea that when we talk about something heavy, the actual play or production has to be heavy itself. And I don't find myself believing that. I'm actually attracted to plays that actually play, that actually like to play with whatever topic they have. Even if it's the heaviest kind of subject matter imaginable, they find some way of being able to present it and navigate around it with this sense of lightness or play, where you can at once watch something and you can get something from it that you may not have known before, but you're also able to engage with it as an audience member who's finding some level of entertainment and joy within it. And that sounds strange. It sounds dichotomous. It sounds like you wouldn't be able to find one with the other, but I find that the plays that are playful, there's a musical coming out about the 6 wives of one of the Henrys, and it's called Six. And I believe they're the ones who all had their heads chopped off, but it's a musical. And was it the 8th? There you go. And Shakespeare, I should have asked you. I should have known that, Emerson. But I like that. I'm like, that is something where you could have tackled something which would regularly be presented in a very heavy way, but it's becoming a musical, and there's something probably inherently playful with that. And that's what I find myself gravitating more towards as a viewer. I'm just appreciating more and more lightness on stage.
Oh, Meggan, do you want to say something?
Oh, there. I do want to add to that. That's the way life is. Life isn't all serious and dark and scary. There are times, when my mother died, there were some hilarious things that happened. I know that seems bizarre, but that is how life is. And one of the plays that struck me like that was a musical called Fun Home, and it's about a funeral parlor and a father commits suicide, and yet there were hilarious parts of this. And the other thing was the music. Even though I'm not a gay woman and I'm not a 13-year-old, but one of the songs, she captured that feeling so perfectly of that feeling of when you like somebody when you're 12 and you see someone and you like them. And I heard this song. She's actually looking at this lesbian that she sees, or a woman she believes to be a lesbian, and it is attracted to her. And I think, I don't know how you did that, but somehow you made that piece be universal, and it was uplifting and hopeful. So there is that about, you can't just write about serious stories seriously. There has to be some levity, because that's how life is.
Thank you, both Beau and Meggan. I that's brilliant insight. Building off of what you all said, it's interesting because there is a sort of, like, they say theater is dying, theater is always dying, and like it's a medium that's not everywhere. So when we say what kinds of plays or playwrights do you think deserve to get more attention, I mean, the first answer is all of them, right? Because, you know, theater in general needs more attention. But yeah, I mean, I think that there's like two different aspects of theater that's really important. There's like the preservation aspect of theater, which is all these historical plays that are just so amazing and so integral to theatrical history, but kind of popcorny. And at this point, we've all seen like every single, like even Tennessee Williams, like all these like really dramatic, horrible stuff. We eat popcorn while we eat it, while we watch them, because they're not actually that dangerous anymore. It's not edgy anymore. You know, but at the same time, we need that edge. We need, when I go to theater, I want the way I see the world to be changed, you know? And so seeing more perspectives from more white men could potentially do that. But I feel like I've seen a lot of perspectives from white men, and I think that there's a fair amount from, you know, minorities, people of color, people from the LGBT community, that, like, I mean, the further you are on the spectrum of just subjugation, the higher the probability that you have a perspective that will be unique just to the world, you know, because we've subjugated those perspectives. And like, I want to see those perspectives, you know. Like my brain is pretty boring most of the time, but I want to have an explosion, you know, and that's why I love theaters, because it gives you an explosion. But I would also answer this question another way. I also like really edgy, just theater in general. Poor theater that doesn't rely on props or set pieces. I like theater that's just the most humane. And I feel like alongside theater productions that are made through subjugated groups, I also like to see theater that's just more edgy in terms of form, and in terms of just taking more risks in general, whether it be theme or form. Our next question is, and I think I'd like to ask Beau to answer this question first. What usually catches your eye when you start to like a new playwright?
For me, that would be point of view. If they're looking at something, it doesn't matter what it is, what subject it is, what topic it is, and if they're looking at it from a point of view that is unique, and they're presenting it in such a way that I would have never considered it, I would have never even thought to have looked at any kind of event or topic or anything in that way, that to me is what I gravitate towards most, even if it's one that I might not necessarily agree with. If I'm able to watch something from a point of view or a framing or a perspective that it might be completely unlike my own, but I can feel it in the writing and in the production, and I don't feel like it's been muted or censored in any way, shape, or form, that's immediately what I go to. That's immediately what I gravitate towards.
Thanks, Beau. Let's go down to Deborah. Deborah, what usually catches your eye when you start to like a new playwright?
I would have to say I don't think it catches my eye because I love laughing. If the jokes are done well, if it's catchy, and I am a black humor kind of person, even though I'm not supposed to laugh at Saturday Night Live because it's racy. As a Christian, I sit there and go, oh, okay. But I still laugh at it because the juxtaposition of things and showing the humor that butts up against it, it just, my son and I sit and we laugh our tails off because a lot of it is funny. These days, there are some things that don't strike a humorous chord, but when the jokes are done well, when you have a drama and they throw that comic relief joke in there, like Meggan was saying, or I think it was actually Emerson said the clowns that came on and spoke just after they found Desdemona, or that's the other play, Ophelia. When you have those moments where you can go, I needed a little bit of that lift after you have that downer of suicide, which is not funny at all. But to have those moments when the gravedigger was holding up Yorick's skull, especially when Robin Williams says it, that always is funny. But when there's a playwright that is new, that has, like Beau was saying, the fresh perspective, even if you don't agree with what their perspective is, it can still make you laugh. And that, for me, if I went through a whole play without laughing once, it would actually be a miracle, because I am one of those that laughs. I got in trouble for laughing in Execution of Justice, which was about the Dan White trial, the Twinkie defense, if you're not familiar with it, when Mayor Moscone and Harvey Milk were killed in City Hall by Dan White. I got my fellow actor angry because I laughed in a very dramatic scene where he was talking about going down to the stairwell and reloading his gun, and he wasn't supposed to be in his right mind. Well, you have to be in your right mind to go reload a gun. So I made the mistake of laughing, and he came up to me after, because he knew who laughed. And he said, I would appreciate it if you wouldn't laugh during my dramatic scene. And I thought, what if it was somebody else? You can't go up to somebody else in the theater and browbeat them into not laughing. But I do like a well-placed joke, the timing, the thought process of the thinking that goes behind the joke that registers later. And that's why I love Neil Simon, because he has those callbacks. He plants the initial joke, and then a minute or two later, you get the comic goldmine when he has the callback, and you go, oh, he was talking about the barf in the elevator. Well, that was actually from Florence. I did the female version. And so when you have those moments of being able to laugh, that's what I look for, even if it's a new playwright.
Thanks, Deborah. Meggan, what usually catches your eye when you start to like a new playwright?
That's a hard question. I'm a terrible audience. I love things. I'm like the easiest. I was like, that's fun. I guess, trying to think, I guess really it's the inclusion of, I want to say that it's the lack of laziness. Like, a lot of writers, or anyone, they tend to get tired or lazy with their work. So they just sort of do it halfway or stop before it gets really edgy. They don't do enough editing. And so that kind of leaves you flat. But when they're not lazy, when you can hear how they've done the work of making it fluid and incorporating all of the aspects of two people relating or five people relating, however many, that's really what catches my eye of how of the work that they've put into writing and creating relationships, because that's what we're really watching. We're not just watching the dialogue, which is important. We're watching relationships, and you have to put the work in to get those the dialogue just right so that it lives. And humor, if it doesn't have humor in it, even in the darkest moments, then it's self-indulgent in a way. Like a lot of these plays about, the bad things. Yes, there's a lot of things we could write about bad things. But when you just dwell on the negative, that's a form of laziness too. And it's also a form of self-indulgence, of letting only one aspect of the subject touch you. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think that's some brilliant insight. I feel like to a certain degree, there's something of guilt in feeling happy that people feel a lot these days, because we're so aware these days about the darkness of the world, and we need levity, because hope is what carries us through. And I think theater is a mirror of life. And if we just try and hold, like, there's like no levity for us here, no lightness, no joy, then we don't really have much hope to hold on to. And we just, like, it's good to confront darkness, but at the same time, we need something to combat it with. Like, let's confront that darkness, but let's also find a way to cut through it, wait, let me just actually focus on the question. Sorry. What usually catches my eye when I start to like a new playwright? Going back to what I was saying about Shakespeare, is I really like rhetoric. And I just love it when someone can take words and just bend them in a way to kind of change my understanding of language. Recently, I was playing a game, and it was a game with Shakespeare, and we're just taking different phrases from Shakespeare. And he's written so many plays that I was just astounded at. There were some of these quotes I hadn't heard yet, and just the way that he bends the meaning of the words is astounding to me. And the same thing happens when I walk into the room. I see a lot of like modern plays, and most of them, they talk in very I would say just common speech language, and which is cool. Like, I don't dislike that. There's actually some plays like that I really enjoy, but I love the heightened language, especially when it's used selectively, when you just have that moment when you speak that idea that just kind of, I like to have that mind-blowing moment. And so for me, a playwright who has just incredible rhetoric skill that can just really bring out the poetry of theater is what catches my eye most and really makes me fall in love with them. Alrighty, so here's our last question, and this is a bit of a doozy. How do you think theater is going to change post-COVID-19 pandemic? And Meggan, if you wouldn't mind, if I know I just put you on the spot for the last question, but would you mind answering first?
No, it'll be fine. Well, the miracle is that with the numbers going down the way they are, it looks like we're going to have theater again. And I did a film shoot. It's not a theater play. I haven't done a theater play yet. I've done a couple Zoom things, but I had done a film shoot and had to be COVID tested before, was in the process of getting vaccinated. I got there and here's grips working, dragging cable, people setting up food service, and I start crying because I can't believe that it's actually over, at least somewhat. So what I was amazed to see, there was a neighborhood in New Orleans that took over vacant storefronts. And I forget the play, but it was a sequential play. So what they did was they had one act in one storefront and one act in the next storefront, so that you kind of move down the street, and they spaced the seating out. And then all of the attendees got an earpiece that they could hear the people talk. And I thought, that's brilliant, because we're going to have a lot of vacant storefronts. And I was just so amazed at that and how brilliant I thought that was. And I do think there's a place. People want to gather. They want to see shows. I've done a couple of these Zoom plays, and frankly, it wasn't like acting, because you're listening to what the person is saying. You can't look at them. I mean, they're fine. They're better than nothing at all, but that's really saying something. So I actually think we will get back there. I worry for the community theaters because community theater used to be where like old has-been people went to go do things in, like places like retirement communities and stuff. But that's not what they are anymore. Community theater in Los Angeles, and there you couldn't swing a dead cat without hitting a community theater in North Hollywood, as an example. And they were professional actors that were doing this to keep themselves in shape. And I worry for those smaller theaters because Edward James Olmos was just on NPR yesterday saying, without community theater, he wouldn't be an actor. And I think it's really important. It's going to be a struggle, but we have to get back there because being together and experiencing live theater is so important for the human experience for everyone, even people who don't typically like theater. It needs to be available to everyone.
Thanks, Megan. Deborah, how do you think theater is going to change post-COVID-19 pandemic?
I know from having heard about the Spanish flu, people got back to things. I know from watching the news that numbers have gone down and things are getting to be more hopeful. Saturday Night Live, they've gone back to acting. A lot of the TV shows, they had to have the protocols of actors being tested and not breaking protocols, such as the guy who was supposed to go sing on Saturday Night Live, who forgot and went to a party the weekend before. He was asked to postpone his piece, so he came back about a month or two afterward. Things, I think, will get back to normal. We might have people that don't get quite so chummy and close, maybe elbow bumping, fist bumping instead of handshaking. But I think even that will get better because eventually, as the vaccines start working and get re-administered the next year, I think things will get back to normal. But Megan's right. The green screen technology, or not green screen, but just acting against a lens, that's like acting for the green screen. Actors have been doing it for a long time, and that's what they look for in the audition rooms, is somebody that can give a reaction, even though the person reading the, whatever you call it, the auditor's lines or the lines that they read while the person's auditioning, they need to see that reaction. So it may not feel genuine to act with a camera screen or a lens, but that is the new normal. So we need to work on those skills. And to be honest, when you have a movie being shot, if they don't need that other person for the scene in the same scene, you've got them talking to somebody who's not even the real actor. So you're not going to get that same reaction from somebody who's a double sitting in the chair. A friend of mine got to be acting against Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery doing The Rock. It's not realistic to think that we're going to always have that ability to be able to act against who's there. But in theater, thankfully, it will rise out of the ashes. There are, in fact, one of the community theaters that I have been a part of over its tenure, and it took a year off saying we're closing, and then they decided, oh, we're re-resurrecting. Well, they sent the note out maybe a week or two ago that it is officially kaput. So yes, there will be casualties, but there are still the actors out there that need something to be in. So somebody will coalesce and it will rise again.
Thank you, Deborah. Mr. McCoy, how do you think theater is going to change the pandemic?
For me, I actually, I've never really kind of bought into the whole conversation because, Simon and Garfunkel were singing about it in the 60s, saying that questioning whether or not theater is really dead. I don't really see it that way. I've never really seen it as being an endangered species, simply for the fact that kind of anything can be theater. People go to a sports game and they see it as being theater. Concerts are theater. Everything is theatrical in its own sense. I think if we're thinking of theater in terms of the parameters of, an enclosed space where people go to, maybe that might be altering. But the thing is that we've been surrounded by screens for the past 14 months. I think we're all sick to death of screens. We're sick to death of, Zoom. We're sick to death of sitting in front of a television. But at the same time, consider dates. For example, people used to go to dinner and a movie. Now you can essentially watch the same movie at home for free if it's on Netflix, or maybe it's on Disney Plus or Hulu or whatnot. So you can essentially watch the same thing that you can see. And I grew up going to the cinema. I didn't have a community theater where I was at. So cinemas are very special to me. They are church-like to me in a way. That's where I did a lot of my contemplating. That's where I did a lot of my growing. But cinemas, I think, will not outlast theater, simply for the fact that we have so many, we were referring to it earlier, we have so much product and we have so much content that's available to us in terms of television, in terms of films, through Netflix, through streamers, through HBO Max. And the cinema is not able to provide the same experience that it once was, because we have televisions now that, could be 80 to 100 inches, wide, however. And so then you consider, well, what's going to take up that space? What's going to take up that mantle? Could it be concerts? Sure, depending on where you are. But there is a void left there, in the same way that I feel like there's going to be a void for retail. Everybody's buying everything online right now, and you really can't find spaces to be able to buy a lot of things. So what takes over the void? Because something essentially has to. And I think that in a way, theater has a unique opportunity right now to make a name for itself. And it doesn't have to be a big name. It doesn't have to be a large entrance. It could be something small, but it could bring people back out, and people can have a dialogue about something live in a way that, and maybe make theater something that it used to be, in the sense where it was a cultural touchstone rather than becoming this sort of niche element of our culture.
Thank you. Those are all brilliant answers. But speaking personally, I've been vaccinated. I actually work in healthcare, so I was vaccinated in December. And almost everyone in my family and all of my friends have been vaccinated now. And so I've been hugging people harder than ever in my life, I think. And I think, Beau, what you're saying is true. I think people are craving in-person contact like never before. And so I think now is a good time for resurgence in theater, at least among the popular people, or the populace, I think like theater, we always love theater, those of us that love theater. Like I haven't done a play. I've been to plays fairly recently, but I haven't done a play in years, in maybe almost 10 years, but now I want to. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that wants to just go back and just look someone in the eye and just feel that raw emotion. Because what we are as human beings is we're relating creatures, and we exist within community, and we need that theater. We need that experience, that sort of one-on-one or corporate, blood and sweat experience. And God bless cinema, but doesn't quite do it. And so I think now is the time. I think a lot of hearts are going to be open to theater as an experience. So we only have 1 minute left, but how about we have closing thoughts? I know, Meggan, you had your finger up. Would you like to close out, have a closing thought?
Yes, I do want to jump on that last thought that you and Beau had. Theater is an reactive experience, but I don't think auditioning for film is ever going to go back to live auditioning. I think they're going to do self-tapes and Zoom, and I think that's going to be, and that's how it's going to be forever. But live theater is a different animal. and people are going to want that. You know, initially movie theaters had air conditioning. That was one of their big draws. They had real cheap popcorn and air conditioning. And during the Depression, that was really important. That's not an issue anymore. But theater, that's something different. It's a different animal.
Beau, if you'd like to have a closing thought.
I just wanted to thank everybody for sharing their thoughts here, and thank you, Emerson, for the opportunity.
And then Deborah, closing thought.
I agree with Beau and with Meggan. I thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts about playwrights and plays and theater, because we need it as a public, as a democracy. We need that voice.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you, Beau, and thank you, Meggan. This was such a pleasure for me. And thank you, of course, to Betsy, who is the producer for this show. Those of you watching, if you haven't seen a play before, I recommend that you go see one, and I know the rest of my panel here agrees. This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for watching, and God bless, and everyone take care.